People say you never forget the day your life changes forever, but for Olivia that day began like any other. The beach wasn't her choice. She hated beaches. She hated the way the sun exposed every part of her, hated the cold water, hated the way strangers' eyes seemed to slide over her body and linger a little too long. But that morning her friends convinced her to go, saying it would do her some good. And so she went. She never imagined that by the end of that day she would owe her life to a stranger, a man who would vanish just as quickly as he appeared, only to re-emerge years later in the most unexpected way. The sun was harsh, the sand hot enough to burn. Olivia hovered at the edge of the water, toes curling into the wet grit, pretending she was having fun. In reality she was tense, uncomfortable, and completely out of place. She wasn't a strong swimmer and she knew it. The tide was stronger than it looked, but she waded in anyway, telling herself she'd be fine. Then it happened. A surge of water rolled in harder than she expected, knocking her off balance. Before she could react, she was dragged further out. She tried to scream, but water filled her mouth. Panic gripped her as she flailed helplessly, her arms and legs heavy, her breath gone. People were laughing and playing just meters away, but no one noticed the silent struggle taking place a few feet beyond them. For one horrifying instant, Olivia thought she was going to die. And then, arms. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind. She felt herself being hauled upward, guided through the water with firm, sure movements. She gasped as air hit her lungs, coughing violently as the stranger dragged her back to shore. She caught glimpses of his face between sputters of seawater, sharp eyes, dark wet hair, a mouth set with determination. He didn't speak, he just acted. When they reached the sand she collapsed to her knees, coughing and shaking. He crouched beside her, his own chest heaving, but his gaze stayed on her with a strange intensity. It wasn't pity. It wasn't judgment. It was something else, something harder to name. Olivia didn't know his name or where he came from. She only knew that in one terrifying moment, this stranger had saved her life. She didn't know it yet, but that day at the beach was only the beginning of a story that would change her forever. After the chaos of nearly drowning, Olivia found herself sitting on the sand, shivering even though the sun was blazing overhead. The stranger who pulled her out stood a few feet away now, dripping wet, his hands resting on his knees as he caught his breath. She looked at him, unsure what to say, unsure even if she could speak, because her chest still ached from the water she had swallowed. He noticed her struggling and finally broke the silence. "You all right?" His voice was calm, steady, almost casual, as if pulling someone out of the sea was nothing unusual to him. Olivia nodded, though her throat burned and words wouldn't come out. He gave her a slight nod back, almost like reassurance but also like a farewell. And then, without ceremony, without even asking for her name, he stood and started to walk away. That should have been the end. A good man saves a stranger, disappears, and life goes on. But Olivia couldn't tear her eyes away. There was something magnetic about him, something that refused to let her file him away as just another random person she'd never see again. She found herself rising unsteadily to her feet, calling out to him before she even realized she was doing it. "Wait," she said, her voice hoarse. He paused, turning his head slightly, water dripping from his hair down his neck and shoulders. Up close she could see him clearly now. He was young, mid-20s maybe. His features were sharp, his expression unreadable, and yet there was something in his eyes that made her stomach twist. "What's your name?" she managed to ask. He hesitated, then gave a faint, almost reluctant smile. "Daniel," he said. And then, just as quickly as he had given it, he turned back toward the path leading away from the shore. For the rest of that day, Olivia couldn't shake the image of him from her mind. She went through the motions with her friends, but she was somewhere else entirely, replaying the moment over and over, the strength of his arms as he pulled her through the water, the calm certainty in his voice, the way he had looked at her like she wasn't invisible. For once, she hadn't felt like the fat girl people whispered about. She had felt human. That night, when the beach was quiet and the world around her had slowed down, Olivia lay in bed staring at the ceiling. She wondered where Daniel was, if he was thinking about her too. But she knew deep down she would probably never see him again. People like him, people who appeared out of nowhere to save you, they didn't linger. They slipped back into the shadows of their own lives, leaving only questions behind. What she didn't know then was that fate had a cruel way of circling back. Daniel wasn't gone. He wasn't forgotten. Their story wasn't finished, not by a long shot. Weeks passed after that day at the beach and Olivia tried to slip back into her routine, but something had shifted inside her. It wasn't just that she had survived drowning, though that alone was enough to keep her awake at night, hearing the rush of water in her ears all over again. It was Daniel. The stranger who appeared out of nowhere, who gave her his name and then disappeared into the noise of the world. She carried him with her in the quiet moments, when she stood in front of the bathroom mirror brushing her hair, when she sat on the bus watching raindrops chase each other down the window, when she passed groups of people laughing on the street. Somehow, his face always found its way back to her. She didn't tell her friends about him. Not really. They only knew she had nearly drowned and they teased her about it, laughing in that cruel but casual way people do when they don't understand how close someone came to death. To them it was just a story to laugh at. To Olivia it was something else entirely. It was a turning point. Then one late afternoon when she was running errands in town, she saw him again. Daniel. Standing at the counter of a small corner cafe, ordering coffee like he wasn't the same man who had pulled her out of the sea weeks before. Her chest tightened instantly. It didn't feel real. She almost convinced herself she was imagining him, until he turned and their eyes met. The recognition flickered across his face, brief but undeniable. For a moment, neither of them moved. The bustle of the cafe seemed to fade away, the sound of clinking cups and murmured voices dropping into silence around them. Olivia's hands trembled and before she could think, she found herself stepping closer. You, her voice cracked. You're Daniel. He gave a faint nod, almost wary. And you're, he hesitated. The girl from the beach. The way he said it made her cheeks burn, though she wasn't sure if it was embarrassment or something else. She wanted to correct him, tell him her name, make herself more than just the girl from the beach. So she did. Olivia, she said softly. My name is Olivia. Daniel repeated it once as if testing it, letting it sit on his tongue. Then he offered a small smile, the kind that didn't reveal much, but enough to make her heart race. They sat down together, though neither of them had planned to. It just happened like some invisible hand was pushing them toward each other. The conversation started slowly and it was even awkward. He wasn't the type to give much away, she could tell that immediately. He was careful with his words, his expression calm, his eyes always watching. But there was an intensity beneath the surface, something about him that made Olivia lean in, desperate to learn more. One coffee turned into two, and then into a walk through the fading evening light. Olivia couldn't remember the last time she felt so alive, so seen, so connected to someone. And the strangest part? Daniel seemed to feel it too. That night, when he walked her home, there was a hesitation between them. The kind that pulls at you, makes the air heavy, makes every heartbeat louder. She didn't plan it, but when he leaned in, she didn't move away. Their lips met briefly, softly, in a kiss that felt more like a question than an answer. And yet it was enough. Enough to change everything. Neither of them said what they were thinking. Neither of them tried to explain the pull they felt. But from that night forward, their lives were tangled together in ways neither of them could have imagined. After that night, Olivia found herself drifting into a rhythm with Daniel, though she couldn't explain how it happened so fast. One day he was just a stranger who had pulled her out of the sea, and the next he was woven into her life in quiet, unexpected ways. They began meeting often, sometimes at the cafe where she had first seen him, again just walking through the city with no real destination. It wasn't about where they went. It was about being near him. Daniel was mysterious. He wasn't the kind of man who opened himself up easily. Olivia noticed the way he deflected specific questions, the way his eyes seemed to hold secrets he had no intention of sharing. Yet at the same time he was gentle with her. When she spoke he listened, really listened. That was something Olivia wasn't used to. Most of her life she had been ignored, talked over, or dismissed because of her appearance. With Daniel she felt present. Important. The connection between them grew quickly, almost dangerously fast. Late-night walks turned into long conversations, and those conversations turned into moments when words weren't needed at all. There were times she'd catch him looking at her with an intensity that made her chest tighten, like he was memorizing her face, as if he knew their time together was fleeting. But beneath the sweetness there was a shadow. Olivia felt it, though she didn't want to admit it. Sometimes Daniel would go quiet, lost in thought, staring out into the distance with that faraway look in his eyes. Once she asked him about his family and he said, "They're not around," before changing the subject. Another time she wondered what he did for work and he gave her only the vaguest answer, "I move around a lot." The mystery should have scared her, but instead, it pulled her in deeper. It made him feel even more like a storm she couldn't resist, unpredictable but impossible to look away from. One evening, after spending hours together, they ended up by the shoreline again. The same place where they had first met. The air was cooler this time, the waves softer, almost as if the ocean itself had calmed down after their first violent introduction. Olivia stood beside him, the salty breeze lifting strands of her hair, and for the first time in a long while she felt at peace. They didn't talk much that night. Words weren't needed. When Daniel reached for her hand, she didn't hesitate. And when the distance between them closed, when his lips met hers again, there was no question, no uncertainty. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't forced. It was raw, heavy with all the things neither of them had dared to say out loud. That night was the first time Olivia let her guard down completely. And for a brief while, it felt like the world had stopped, like maybe she had finally stumbled into the kind of love people only whispered about. But the truth was, Daniel was a man who didn't stay in one place for long. He was the kind of person who came like a wave, powerful, overwhelming, unforgettable, but waves never stay. Deep down Olivia sensed it. She didn't want to face it. And as fate would have it, she didn't have to wonder for long. Because soon after, Daniel was gone. No explanation, no goodbye, just gone. When Olivia woke the morning after Daniel vanished, her first thought was that something had gone wrong. She checked her phone over and over again, scrolling through messages that weren't there, waiting for a call that never came. At first, she tried to convince herself it was nothing. Maybe he was busy, perhaps he just needed time. But as days turned into weeks, the silence stretched longer, sharper, until it was undeniable. Daniel wasn't coming back. The realization hit her like a second drowning. Except this time, there were no arms to pull her to safety, no one to guide her back to shore. He had left her with nothing but questions, and those questions gnawed at her in every quiet moment. Who was he really? Why had he disappeared? Had she meant nothing to him at all? But the cruelest part was that Olivia couldn't even hate him. Because even as anger simmered in her chest, her heart ached with something else. The memory of his touch, the sound of his voice, the way he had looked at her like she wasn't invisible. That memory wouldn't let her move on. And then months later came the truth she couldn't ignore. A truth that terrified her more than the silence ever had. Olivia was pregnant. At first, she thought it was impossible, like her body was playing some cruel trick on her. But the signs were undeniable. The doctor's words confirmed what she already knew in her gut. Daniel hadn't just left her with memories. He had left her with a piece of himself, a life growing inside her. The news hit Olivia hard. Fear wrapped around her like a vice. She wasn't ready. She wasn't the kind of woman people pictured raising a child on her own. She had spent her whole life fighting against stares, whispers, and judgment. And now she would face all of it with a baby. Alone. There were nights she cried herself to sleep, her hands pressed against her stomach, wishing she could call him, wishing she could tell him, hoping he would appear out of the shadows the way he had that first day on the beach. But he didn't. He was gone and the silence remained. Still, as the months passed, something changed within Olivia. She began to see the pregnancy not as a curse, but as a strange kind of gift. Her body carried the weight of it, yes, but her heart carried something else, hope. Maybe Daniel would never know. Perhaps the child would never meet him. But Olivia promised herself one thing. She would give this baby everything she could. She would love her in a way she had never been loved herself. And when the day finally came and Olivia held her newborn daughter for the first time, all the pain, the abandonment, the fear, it all faded into the background. In her arms, wrapped in soft blankets, was a tiny girl with eyes that reminded her of Daniel. A girl named Emily. From that moment on, Olivia's life wasn't about what she had lost. It was about what she had gained. She was a mother now. And nothing would ever be the same. Life as a single mother was nothing like Olivia had imagined. People around her offered the usual lines of comfort. You'll be fine, babies are a blessing, it gets easier with time. But those words meant little at 3 in the morning when Emily was crying. Olivia was too exhausted even to think straight. There were nights she sat in the dark, rocking her daughter against her chest, tears streaming silently down her cheeks as she whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep. Money was tight. It had always been tight, but now it was suffocating. Olivia's savings drained quickly, eaten up by hospital bills, baby clothes, formula, and rent. She took on shifts wherever she could, working long hours, sometimes skipping meals to stretch every penny. Her body ached constantly, her mind was always tired, but every time Emily's tiny hand curled around her finger, she remembered why she couldn't give up. And slowly, something unexpected began to happen. The woman who once avoided mirrors started to change. The extra weight she carried began to fall off, not because she wanted it to, but because she worked herself to the bone every single day. Walking to shifts, rushing between jobs, barely having time to eat, her body shifted with the demands of survival. Within a year, Olivia had transformed into a different woman. She was slimmer, yes, but it was more than that. There was a hardness in her eyes now, a resilience born from sleepless nights and endless sacrifices. She had transformed into someone stronger than even she thought possible. Still, the loneliness never left. Every time Emily laughed, Olivia felt the hollow ache of knowing Daniel would never hear it. Every birthday candle, every first word, every tiny milestone, they were victories shadowed by absence. She wanted to hate him for leaving her, but how could she? Every time she looked at her daughter's face, she saw him. By the time Emily was 3, Olivia had managed to secure steady work at a local restaurant. It wasn't glamorous, long hours on her feet cleaning up after strangers, smiling at rude customers, but it paid the bills. She wore the uniform, tied her hair back, and forced a smile each day, reminding herself she was doing it all for her little girl. It was on one of those ordinary days that everything changed again. The restaurant was busy that afternoon, packed with the lunchtime rush. Olivia moved quickly, balancing trays, pouring coffee, trying to stay ahead of the chaos. She was carrying a fresh pot, weaving between tables when someone bumped into her. The pot tipped, spilling a stream of scalding coffee across the table and onto the hand of the man sitting there. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Olivia gasped, grabbing napkins to try to help. The man hissed, shaking his hand from the burn, and Olivia finally looked up. Her heart stopped. It was him. Daniel. Older now, sharper somehow, dressed in a pressed shirt that told her his life had gone very differently from hers. His hair was shorter, his face more defined, but the eyes, those same piercing eyes, locked onto hers and the world around them fell away. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Neither of them even breathed. The clamor of the restaurant faded into nothing, replaced by a silence so heavy it pressed down on Olivia's chest. She wanted to run, to scream, to cry, but she couldn't move. Daniel's expression shifted slowly, confusion giving way to recognition. And in that instant Olivia knew. He remembered her. But he didn't just remember the woman he pulled from the sea. He remembered everything. Daniel stared at her like he was seeing a ghost. His hand, still red from the coffee burn, stayed frozen midair as his eyes bore into Olivia's. She felt the blood rush to her face, her throat tightening until she could barely breathe. The tray in her hands shook and she set it down quickly before it slipped. "Olivia," he said finally, his voice low, almost disbelieving. Hearing her name on his lips again after all those years was like reopening a wound she had worked so hard to scar over. She wanted to look away, to pretend he was just another customer, but there was no escaping it. "Not now." "You remember me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel's jaw tightened. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning her face as though piecing together fragments of the past. "Of course I remember," he muttered. "How could I not?" For a second Olivia almost broke. She wanted to yell at him, ask him where he had gone, why he had left her with nothing but silence and a broken heart. She wanted to demand the answers she had carried for years. But she couldn't. Not here. Not in the middle of the restaurant with customers watching and servers rushing around them. Instead, she forced herself to take a breath. "I have to finish my shift," she said quietly, holding on to the last shred of professionalism she had. We can't talk here." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded once, his gaze still locked on her like he was afraid she would vanish if he blinked. "Then tell me when," he said firmly. That night, after she put Emily to bed, Olivia found herself sitting across from Daniel at a quiet booth in the very same restaurant, long after it had closed. The air was thick with everything unsaid. "You disappeared," she finally said, her voice sharp, cracking under the weight of all those years. "No calls, no messages, nothing. You just vanished." Daniel's expression darkened. He ran a hand through his hair and sighed, his shoulders heavy. "I had to leave. Things were complicated back then. You wouldn't have understood." "That's it," Olivia snapped. "That's all you have to say? Do you have any idea what you left me with? Do you even know what I've been through?" Daniel looked up at her then, his eyes narrowing, searching hers. "What do you mean?" he asked slowly. The words caught in her throat. She hadn't planned for this moment. She had spent years rehearsing speeches in her head, picturing what she would say if she ever saw him again. But now that the chance was here, everything tangled inside her. She bit her lip, her hands trembling in her lap. Finally she whispered, "You have a daughter." The silence that followed was suffocating. Daniel's face went pale, his lips parting slightly as though he couldn't quite process what he'd just heard. He blinked at her, searching for some sign that she was joking, but Olivia's eyes held no trace of a lie. "A daughter?" His voice was barely audible. Olivia nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Her name is Emily. She's 3. She looks just like you. For the first time since she had known him, Daniel looked completely undone. His confident composure shattered, replaced by something raw, fear, shock, maybe even guilt. He leaned back, running both hands over his face, trying to steady himself. I never knew, he whispered. Olivia. I never knew. But Olivia didn't soften. Years of carrying the burden alone, years of struggling while he lived freely, years of raising Emily without a father. All of it burned inside her. No, she said sharply. You didn't care to know. And with that, the room went silent again. Two people, once strangers, tied together by fate, now bound forever by the child neither of them had planned for. The next morning, Olivia sat at the kitchen table, staring at her daughter as Emily ate her cereal, humming a little tune only a child could invent. Her curls bounced with each movement, her big brown eyes wide with innocence. Olivia's chest tightened as she thought of Daniel's face the night before. Emily had no idea that the man who saved Olivia years ago, the man who had vanished without a trace, was her father. But Daniel knew now. And Olivia couldn't shake the image of him sitting there, broken, stunned, whispering the word daughter as if it had turned his entire world upside down. Later that day Daniel showed up. He stood at the doorway, hesitant, dressed not in the polished suit she had seen at the restaurant but in something simpler, softer. In his hand was a small, brand-new toy bunny, its fur still too clean to be real. I want to meet her, he said quietly, his voice trembling. Olivia froze. Every part of her screamed no. No, because where was he when Emily cried at night? Where was he when Olivia had to work 3 jobs to keep food on the table? Where was he when she was exhausted, alone, begging for help that never came? But Emily had always asked, Mommy, why don't I have a daddy like the other kids? Olivia would smile through the pain and say, because you have me, sweetheart. And I'm enough. Still, she knew nothing she said could ever fill that void. So Olivia stepped aside, letting Daniel into the apartment. He crouched low the moment he saw Emily on the floor playing with her crayons. His hands shook as he whispered, Hi there. Emily looked up at him, her head tilted, curious. She had no idea who he was. To her, he was just another grown-up, but something in her little eyes softened when she noticed the toy bunny he held out. For me? She asked, her voice tiny but bright. Daniel's throat tightened. Yes, for you. Emily grinned and took the bunny, hugging it tight before skipping back to her drawings. Daniel stayed crouched, his eyes glassy as he watched her, as though he couldn't believe she was real. Olivia stood at the side, her arms folded. She studied him carefully. The Daniel she remembered was confident, untouchable, the kind of man who carried himself like the world belonged to him. But this Daniel was different. He was fragile, vulnerable, as if the truth had stripped him bare. Finally, Emily ran back over, holding up a crayon drawing she had made. Look, she beamed. This is me and Mommy at the park. Daniel smiled, though his lips trembled. He swallowed hard and said, Maybe next time you can draw me too? Emily's little eyes lit up with excitement, and she nodded eagerly before bouncing away again. And for the first time in years, Olivia saw something she hadn't expected in Daniel's eyes. Not just regret, not just guilt, but something more profound. A longing. A desperate hunger to belong to the life he had missed. But whether Olivia would let him, that was a battle she hadn't yet decided to fight. Over the next few weeks, Daniel continued to show up. At first it was small things. He'd drop by with groceries saying he wanted to help. He'd bring little toys or books for Emily, who quickly warmed up to him. To her he was fun, charming, almost like an uncle she never knew she had. But to Olivia it wasn't that simple. Every time she saw him with Emily, laughing and playing, a storm brewed inside her. Part of her wanted to scream at him, to remind him of the nights she cried herself to sleep, the years of loneliness and struggle. But another part of her couldn't ignore the way Emily's face lit up whenever Daniel walked into the room. One night, after Emily had gone to bed, Olivia confronted him. Why now, Daniel? She asked sharply. Why, after all these years? You disappear, you don't call, you don't look for me, and suddenly you want to be a father? Daniel didn't argue back. Instead, he sat at the edge of the couch, staring at his hands like a man carrying the weight of the world. I didn't know, he said finally. His voice was low, steady, but heavy with pain. That night at the beach I wasn't myself. I wasn't thinking straight. I thought it was just a moment, a mistake. And then, I left. I left without knowing what would come next. I didn't know about her, Olivia. Not until I saw Emily's face. And then it all made sense. She looks just like... His voice cracked and he looked away. Just like me. Olivia's chest tightened, but her anger didn't let her soften. So what? You think you can walk back in Playhouse and erase the years you abandoned us? Daniel lifted his head slowly, and there was fire in his eyes now. I don't expect forgiveness, Olivia. I don't deserve it. But she does. Emily deserves to know her father. She deserves to know she was never unwanted. Please, don't take that from her. Olivia's throat burned. She hated him for saying it, but deep down she knew he wasn't wrong. She had worked so hard to give Emily everything, but no matter how much she loved her, she couldn't erase the space where a father's presence should have been. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Daniel broke it with a whisper, I want to fight for her. I'll do whatever it takes. Those words stuck with Olivia long after he left that night. She lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, torn between her resentment for the man who had left her behind and the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, Emily could have the father she had always longed for. But one thing was sure. If Daniel wanted to stay, if he genuinely wanted to be part of Emily's life, it wasn't going to be easy. He would have to prove himself. And Olivia wasn't sure if he had the strength to carry that burden. Daniel didn't give up. Day after day he kept coming back, not in a way that smothered them but in quiet, consistent gestures. He'd walk Emily to school when Olivia's shift started too early. He'd fix the broken hinge on the kitchen cabinet. He even learned how Emily liked her pancakes, extra syrup, no butter, cut into tiny squares, something Olivia hadn't even told him. Slowly, almost against her will, Olivia saw something changing. This wasn't the same man she had met years ago in the chaos of the sea. That man was reckless, untethered, fleeting. This man was steady, determined. He carried guilt like a shadow, but he didn't run from it. One evening, Emily came home from school with a drawing clutched in her hands. She burst through the door, grinning, shouting for her mom and Daniel to look. When she spread the paper on the table, Olivia felt her chest ache. It was a family picture. 3 stick figures holding hands under a bright sun. A little girl in the middle with curly hair, a woman on one side and a man on the other. Above it, in uneven letters, Emily had written, Me, Mommy, Daddy. Daniel froze when he saw it. His jaw clenched, his eyes filled with tears. He tried to blink away. He looked at Olivia, his lips parting as if he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. Olivia stared at the picture for a long time. 1,000 thoughts crashed in her head. Could she forgive him? Did he even deserve forgiveness? Could she ever trust him again? That night, after Emily fell asleep, Olivia found Daniel standing on the balcony, staring at the city lights. You know this doesn't erase the past, she said quietly. Daniel nodded, his shoulders slumping. I know. I'll never be able to change what I did, or what I didn't do. He turned toward her, his eyes raw and unguarded. But I can change what I do now. If you let me. For a long time neither of them spoke. The air between them was heavy but alive, as if something unspoken was growing there. Finally Olivia sighed, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily deserves the chance to know you. But if you break her heart, if you walk away again, it'll destroy her. And I won't let that happen. Daniel's voice cracked as he replied, I won't. Not again. I promise. And though promises had burned her before, there was something in his voice, not polished, not rehearsed, just broken and real, that made Olivia believe, even if only a little. The story didn't end with a kiss or some perfect fairy tale. Instead, it ended with a quiet, cautious step toward something new. A fragile beginning stitched together with pain, forgiveness, and hope. As Daniel tucked Emily into bed later that night, she looked up at him with sleepy eyes and whispered, Good night, Daddy. He froze, his heart breaking open at the word he had never thought he'd hear. He leaned down, kissed her forehead, and whispered back, Good night, my little girl. And in that moment, Olivia knew the road ahead would be complicated, messy, and uncertain. But for the first time in years she felt like maybe, just maybe, they weren't walking it alone anymore. Please, if you enjoyed the video, please like, share and subscribe.